Good afternoon. My name is Seumas Kerr and I'm Managing Director of the D Group based here in Mayfair. The role of the D Group is to assist companies with strategic business development and help develop their strategies. It helps them win work. We also act as an interface between government and business, helping translate the what into the how and the realities that businesses can assist with. Welcome to this Inspiring Leadership series. I'd now like to hand over to Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed, Seumas. It's great to have you on the series, and a number of people spoke very highly of you. You were a Major General in the Army, and they served with you or knew you, or they've been very impressed by the work that the D Group does and the fascinating people that you're connected to. You have a black book to envy any headhunter of all these fascinating leaders who have been CEOs, have been senior officers, and a variety of roles. So thank you for coming on the series. Tell us what you're doing at the moment and what you enjoy most about being the Managing Director of the D Group.
What we're doing at the moment, we very much reflect what our members wishes to assist them with, and we're operating in 4 particular areas or themes. The first one is national security, and we're working with Stephen Lovegrove, the National Security Advisor, again, following on from the integrated review and assisting him, as they've asked for an interface with business in looking at the 146 recommendations with the integrated review, how business can assist in translating those into actions. Our second theme is space. And we've been, again, working with the MOD in their National Space Command and other areas, and also helping them develop that by getting feedback from business and assisting. At the moment, we're looking at assisting with how we finance it, because there's not enough government money to go around for that. We also operate in the infrastructure space and work with Nick Smallwood from the Cabinet Office. And we've produced a couple of papers assisting him, but in essence, how do we decarbonize the built estate? How do we bring down price? And how do we also increase the margin for the construction companies? Because at the moment they operate in a very low area of profit margins of 1 or 2%, which is very challenging. We also operate in technology, so artificial intelligence, cyber, quantum, fusion, what all this means for business going forward. And the golden thread is very much net zero. You know, the big challenge that we now face on the world, to try and keep the temperature range now down to under 1.5% is going to be a real challenge. So how do we deal with that? And not only here in the UK, but huge security implications out in India, also in Nigeria, in Africa, and you know, they all very much interweave and they're interwoven and work together.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Seumas. I mean, it's fascinating areas that you deal with, but also I'm going to talk a bit about your life in a moment. But what a fascinating life you've had. You've circumnavigated the world in the Merchant Navy. You joined the Army for a £5 bet, and then left some 35 years later as a Major General, serving in a variety of fascinating roles with some other inspiring leaders that you've learned from on the way. But tell me, if we take you right back to childhood, what shaped you into the leader you are today? What events happened to you? Where were you born? What parents, values that they set in you? Just tell us a bit about yourself, Seumas, if you would, for a few minutes.
Yes, so my father was a country vet. We grew up in Ludlow in Shropshire on a farm. I think from the very outset, my father used to play back to us, and it was rather boring at the time, but work and play are just 4-letter words. And if you can interpose them, it actually makes life a lot easier and a lot more fun. I was sent off to boarding school at 6. So I think that, perhaps a bit early, certainly for these days, but it did give you a level of independence. And I remember, I think this is going way back now to the very early 60s, meeting one evening Field Marshal Lord Montgomery.
Wow.
and we were lining up to go into church, and a good friend standing on my left was Ponting Horton. And Ponting Horton, I think it was his great uncle, had been the photographer on the Scott expedition. So Montgomery came and met both of us, and we had to stand in front of him in church for an hour that evening. But I think all those experiences kind of shape one's life. John Betjeman had been to the school and used to come and read poetry once a term. We went to church 3 times a day. And I think the church at the beginning of one's life played a very important part in my life. And I've tried to live to those standards if I possibly can do so. I mean, not to be self-righteous, but I think right from the very beginning. And if you stay in school and you're fortunate enough to become a house captain or a school captain, you begin to see the difference you can perhaps make as a leader.
And could you explain, when you went from school and whatever transition you had into the army, what was, after your time going around the world with the Merchant Navy, what was the specialism you went into within the army, and what were some of the most interesting roles that you had that those who were in the military would understand if they heard the different units you were with and the brigades and divisions?
I mean, I think I was exceptionally fortunate. I didn't come from a military background. I knew nothing about the military at all. My platoon commander was in the Ordnance Corps, and I was only going to join for 3 years. And during those first 3 years after leaving Sandhurst, I spent a year with the Gloucesters and did a Northern Ireland tour as a young platoon commander, which many of us did at that stage. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed that, and would probably have wanted to stay with the Gloucesters for a few more years, but the Corps wanted me to come back. So I was very lucky to be promoted to a captain at 21.
Wow.
I think some of the most important or shaping tours at that stage were, I was very lucky, I think, to be an adjutant, staff captain in 12 Armoured Brigade. And I think one needs luck in one's career, the people one works with. So Nick Horton was a captain in the same headquarters, who ultimately became Chief of Defence Staff and is now Lord Horton of Richmond. And there were two or three of us at that stage, all ended up as generals from the headquarters. And I think that was very much leadership from the brigade commander.
Who was the brigade commander?
Peter Davis at that stage.
Oh yes, with Royal Signals. Royal Signals,
you'll know well.
Yeah.
And following that, I went on to Staff College in Quetta, the old Indian Army Staff College in Pakistan, which I think, going to an overseas staff college, gives you a more rounded view of life, and you begin to see things from the other person's lens, as opposed to just your own. I came back from there and was Deputy Chief of Staff, 7th Armoured Brigade. Christopher Wallace was the brigade commander, and was my divisional commander when I was a commanding officer as well. David Leakey, who became a Lieutenant General, and Black Rob was the Chief of Staff. And James Shaw, the Signal Squadron Commander, became a Major General as well. You'll know James Shaw.
I do, yeah.
And I put that all down to luck. If you're lucky to work with talented people, I wouldn't claim I'm particularly talented, but you learn from them and you're given those opportunities. And I thoroughly enjoyed those opportunities in a brigade headquarters. I was then fortunate to be on the directing staff at Staff College in Camberley. Commanded a battalion and then a new regiment in the Royal Logistic Corps. From there went out to Northern Ireland, and I'll refer to some incidents in Northern Ireland later on. But General Roger Wheeler, who became Chief of the General Staff, I think was a particularly good GOC and an outstanding leader. And from there was lucky to command a logistic brigade and finish commanding the 4th Division. And I think the training that the Army provides throughout, we are so fortunate compared to business. I'd only pick out one course, I think, which is the Royal College of Defence Studies, which Winston Churchill formed in 1927. And you had their representatives from the Navy, Army, and Air Force, but also the Metropolitan Police, the prison service, the big OEMs, Lockheed Martins of this world, BAE Systems. On my particular course, I think we're nearly just over 70 overseas officers from all over the world. And you studied anything that could be a potential threat to world security, from political systems to religion, to raw materials, to water. And you did a world tour. I mean, what more could you ask for? But it could be looking through the lens of an Israeli, somebody from Zimbabwe. We had someone from China there, somebody from Russia, particularly pertinent when you note what's happened today with Russia invading the Ukraine. But I mean, I love my 35 years, and I think I've been particularly lucky again afterwards, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the 16 years I've been in business.
Yeah, because you had that nice mix of, you had 12 years afterwards at Carillion, where, if I'm right, where you saw some interesting experiences, but also things didn't go so well at times. And I'm sure you learned a lot from what does work and what doesn't work. What was your thought about what you learned in both in the military and then what you learned in Carillion?
It's interesting you've asked that question. I think it comes down to the importance of leadership and preparing leaders to lead at the appropriate level, the tactical, the operational, and the strategic. And we had a really strong operational leader in Carillion, and he was dealt some very difficult hands. And I think if he looked back, he would probably say, I wish I'd been prepared better for this role than I actually had. And I wrote a paper on it afterwards and compared very much the kind of strategic leadership qualities required in the military and required in business. And they are very similar, but I would say in the military, it's all about operational output, where in business, you clearly have to generate a profit, but also lead people with all the same values at the same time.
Yeah, there's many lessons with the different business CEOs that I'm working with now that they could have learned a lot from both that paper that you wrote, but also your experience of the strategic, the operational, the tactical. And people tend to get drawn down to the lowest possible denominator in business, I see, and they have to be pulled up so they're not doing the next 2 levels down, or a couple of founders of a big multi-billion business I know who are tempted to go 2 levels down and start getting involved in the weeds of things. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't understand what's going on. It's very important you do, but I think they have a tendency to do that. That's really interesting. And Seumas, can we then go on to looking at the whole of your career, proudest moment and what you learned from that, the happiest moment for you, and also perhaps the darkest moment when things weren't so great, either personally or with work, and what you learned from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to answer some of these questions, but I think the proudest moment, I think, would be, I've chosen the 3 proudest moments because they're all actually very similar, which was the birth of our 3 daughters, and to see them grow up into 3 wonderful young women, and the importance of family. And it's family, I think, that you fall back on in those dark times. And if you're lucky enough to have a strong family behind you, it gives you a strength and a resilience, which I think if you're operating on your own or you're operating in a vacuum behind you, must be particularly difficult. I think one of the darkest moments in my life was on the 2nd of June, 1994. I was a full colonel as a DCOS in headquarters Northern Ireland, and we had that awful Chinook accident when 29 people were killed, and General Sir Roger Wheeler, having gone across on the recce that night, sent me across the next morning, and I spent the next 2 weeks identifying all of the bodies, many of them my friends, and bringing them back, speaking to the widows, arranging funerals, going to funerals. And it was a challenging time, but General Roger had gone across on that first evening, and he met the superintendent who dealt with the Lockheed bomb. And he said that whoever you send over, don't leave them there on the ground overnight, bring them back to the headquarters. So each day I was flown back at the end of the day and back early in the morning, and would have a glass of whiskey with Roger and talk over what happened. And I think one of the lessons is that if you're going through challenging times, it really helps to share it and discuss it. And it's if you keep it to yourself and you internalize it too much, I think that's when people end up with PTSD and other mental challenges which so many people are facing at the moment.
It's really interesting, and you and I were talking about this before we started the series. Do you find that things come back to you from that time, or have you managed to deal with it and compartmentalize it?
I do think about it and talk about it, and it does come back. But I mentioned luck quite a lot. I think it's luck on your intellect, luck what skills you may or may not have. And I've largely been able to compartmentalize it and deal with it, because in the military you see a number of things over your career, and you do have to deal with it. And if you can't deal with it, you can't talk about it. I think it creates, well, we've seen it creates real problems. And I think at the end of the Northern Ireland campaign, we had psychiatric nurses down at each site. People were debriefed after incidents. And I think we forgot those lessons when we went into the Balkans, and then we went into Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think we're seeing the consequences now of young men and women having real challenges.
There's many things in what you've said that really resonate with me. I'll come back to the challenges in business of people with mental health issues. People understand it in the military. But this tragic instance where 29 were killed reminds me, in my upbringing, my grandfather was flying from Northern Ireland. He worked for the War Office on a project I can't talk about even now, but he was flying to see my uncle, who was a pilot in Lossiemouth. And on his way there, it crashed into a hillside and everybody in the aircraft was killed. And then my father was killed on a Buccaneer Mark I aircraft, age 33, when a piece of the engine flew out and cut through it, caused a fire. My father got the navigator out, but he died trying to bring the aircraft in. And then my uncle was killed test flying a helicopter at Porton Down with the inventor when the blades fell off the helicopter and it piled into the ground. So those kind of incidents, you never as a family, and I can't imagine what it's like for the 29 different families affected by it, you never get over it. You live with it throughout the whole of your life. And I'm drawn to the point you make about mental health. I'm seeing more and more cases of burnt out senior executives who are on what we would have seen as 4-6 month back-to-back tours, and they're exhausted and burnt out, and they're not coping very well. I don't know whether you've come across much as you discuss this kind of topic with different business leaders at the D Group.
Yes, I have, and we've had speakers on mental health. I mean, how I cope with it and how I advise, if I'm asked for advice, I think it's so important to keep yourself physically fit. I think as we have good, bad, and indifferent physical health, we also have good, bad, and indifferent mental health. And different people deal with pressures in different ways. But I look at the people who succeed in leading, and it's not taken as stress. I think they found what is a passion in their life. They seem to have a good balance between their family life and their work. They keep themselves in good physical shape, and they don't make the mistake of trying to do everything you alluded to earlier. If you're leading at a strategic level, you don't have to be busy all the time. You should make time to be able to think, make time to go and visit your people on the ground, and ensure that you live your values of your company. If, as you said, you try and do everything right down to the bottom level, you are clearly going to be overworked, come under pressure, and then not perform.
Yeah, exactly. No, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And if all the experience that you've had now, both in services, in business, and now across both sectors, really, in a way, in this fascinating role you've got now, looking back to when you were 16, Seumas, if you could go back to the future in the DeLorean car and meet yourself with all the wisdom you have, what would you say? This matters, but don't worry about that. It really doesn't matter. What advice would you give yourself?
If I look back at myself, I think I was too serious on occasions, and didn't take or make the time to enjoy the moment, because we have such wonderful experiences in our life, and we were very busy then. But I think now, with the modern pressures of technology, people are even busier, and therefore I think it is so important to make time for things, make time for the family, make time for looking after your staff, celebrate success, help people where you possibly can. But to directly answer your question, I would say enjoy the moment and enjoy life. We punish ourselves so much in our head unnecessarily, worrying about things. And I can remember, you'd leave a dinner party or an event, and you think, I wish I'd said that better. You can't change it. Life has to go on. Put it behind you and crack on.
Yeah, I really resonate with that one. I think, and Richard Dannett was always one. When I was he was commanding officer, I was a company commander, a young, rather naive company commander, and he would say, John, don't take things too seriously. Lighten up a bit. I resonate with that one. And I think humanity, humility, and humor are the things that I probably would have told myself back there. Let's go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass. This is the research that we did into what makes high-performing leaders and teams. Seumas, the first one is MQ, moral quotient. Your 3 fundamental values that you aspire to live by, and what did you learn on those occasions when you let it slip?
I mean, I'm not particularly religious, I don't think. I mean, but I go back to, I think, my time at school, and when we were very much taught to try and live by the 10 commandments. And I think if you sat down as a human being and you tried to write down how one should lead your life as a society, I can't think of a much better guidance than the 10 commandments. And if we let them slip, I mean, you're saying is, how do you deal with it? I mean, we try not to, but we're human beings. We do make mistakes. Occasionally we're selfish. Occasionally we're not as caring as we should be. I think it's a matter of being honest and being open and accepting that. Apologize for your mistakes, and then again move on and learn from where you've made those mistakes.
Yeah, I think apologizing and having some humility to admit when you've done wrong or you've made a mistake is so important. And in the CEOs that I see that struggle the most, they're the ones that, when you ask them, when was the last time you personally were dead wrong? I had one guy who said to me, could have been 1982, or maybe it was earlier than that. I really can't remember. I'm generally not wrong. And you go, that's the problem. If you can't admit that you personally were wrong and you've got something to learn and you can rectify it, then we've got severe problems. It's almost the Trump syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, you have to learn all the time. I mean, I am so fortunate in this job that the speakers that we have in, the leaders from industry, and the real leaders are humble, and they do continue to learn, and they are inspirational because of that, and also the importance of just being yourself. Don't try and be somebody else. Whoever you think is a great leader, it may be Winston Churchill, but don't try and be a Winston Churchill. Be yourself.
Yeah, I wish someone had told Boris that. Yeah, that would have gone down well. PQ is the next one. Personal purpose and meaning. What gives you a vocation, a calling? You've served for 35 years, but you did things before that with the Merchant Navy, and now you've been in business and now cross business and cross government. Why do you do what you do, Seumas?
We had all our children, as three daughters and their partners and grandchildren over Christmas, and they were there for New Year's Eve, and they asked a similar question, and I'll give the short answer, then give a bit more detail after. Daddy, what do you do? And we just help people. That is my job, and if I can help people realize their ambitions and help company realize their ambitions, it makes it a good day. And there are good days and there are bad days. But if you can help people realize their true potential ambitions, it gives me great satisfaction to be able to do it. I think it's important about being kind. It's so important because it's a difficult world. And also have a sense of fun. You've got to enjoy every day. It goes back to, when you asked me about the advice you give that young 16-year-old, don't be so serious. Enjoy life, continue to enjoy it. You described your relatives who died. It could happen to any of us. I could get knocked over going to catch a black cab back to the club tonight. So actually enjoy every moment. Enjoy this interview.
Yeah, it's things like that. We don't know how long we've got to live. There's a cracking book I recommend, quite philosophical, called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And I've really enjoyed listening to it a couple of times. I'm dyslexic, so my way of learning is to listen to audiobooks. And, if you were to think back between when you were born, Seumas, and if you make it to 80, then you have 4,000 weeks on the planet. What are you going to do with your 4,000 weeks? I mean, I'm just about to celebrate my 60th, which gives me 1,040 weeks left. Now, that's not long. So, make the most of that week and that day, I've certainly learned. Thank you for that on purpose. The next one round is health. And we've talked about mental health components, and you've also mentioned a bit on physical. But what about you? What's worked for you? Colin Powell's book was it worked for me, but what's worked for you over the years, keeping yourself fit and healthy?
I think like you, we both served, and you were encouraged to keep fit. So I think I'm a strong believer in keeping yourself physically fit, right to the end of your life as much as you possibly can do so. So I try and take as much exercise as I can. I don't during the week get as much in London as I should do, but back home at the weekends, I will try and cycle each day. If I can, go swim. I might go and hit some golf balls. Still try perhaps occasionally the odd game of squash. But it all helps, and it helps you relax. And I think that translates right into your mental health as well. Because I think by putting yourself under pressure, and I think there is evidence that the endomorphins that you generate have a positive impact on your brain. And I think it's kept me in reasonable shape. I think quite often, there is an issue around mental health and hereditary conditions, which are difficult to deal with. But I said, right, I think it's a matter of talking about it. If you talk about challenges, a challenge shared makes it easier to deal with.
No, there's no doubt about it. There's an interesting book I'm just reaching up into my shelf, Brain Maker, which I've just finished reading by Dr. David Perlmutter. And it's really about the essence of our eat, move, sleep, breathe, that kind of important parts, but that actually our microbiome and what we feed it has a huge impact on our mental health and also on our longevity and our physical health. And the whole area of the microbiome and our epigenetics, the way that we can shape our genetics by the life we lead, the stress we have, the sleep we have. I think it's a fascinating area. Thank you for your part on health.
Yeah, and I think genetics as well play an important part, and that's coming back to luck again, which I've referred to a few times. I mean, my father was still working at 82, and his father was still working at 84.
Wow.
And it's that bit. If you find something you have a passion about, it's not really work. It's a privilege to do it, and therefore it takes the pressure off.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And also when people come to the end of their career, if they suddenly stop and retire and just don't do anything, they're often tragically, like a number of judges, dead within a couple of years. So you do need to keep the body and the brain active and alive. That the research certainly shows. You are commended by various people by your emotional and social intelligence, your ability to read people, connect people, particularly in your job. It is one of getting to know a whole load of different people and finding what makes them tick. What's your top tip about how you've developed emotional and social intelligence? If people were listening, what tip would you give them?
I think I would say it's beginning to really understand people. And when you would talk when you went out to the Middle East on business, and you might be invited to a majlis, that actually a lot of the talk is all about family and getting to understand what people makes people tick. People generally like speaking about themselves, and therefore learn to listen. And if you have a genuine love of people, it's not difficult. But some people are shy and reticent and quieter. You can't really change who you are. But somehow make the best of what you actually have. I enjoy people's comfort. We do a lot of coaching here for leadership as well at peer working group, and also potential C-suite directors. And we look at all the softer skills that people can develop. And so much of it is, as you become more senior, is having those list of contacts, people you can go to. But if they become genuine friends, and you're not just, and it's awful when people just try and take advantage of people for who they are, you must be genuine from what you are all the time. And it's probably an overused phrase, but treat others as you wish to be treated yourself. So if you're generous, I will do as much as I possibly can for people. I don't want paying for it. And then, occasionally you may have a favor to ask of somebody, and hopefully they will help you.
Yeah, and that's raised up in a recent book I was reading by Adam Grant called Give and Take, where in the research he finds that there's people like the gentleman Lay in charge of Enron, who was a taker, but he appeared to be a giver, but it was always with the expectation of something in return. And then you come across some phenomenal people who are very giving, and then there's matchers who tend to give, but with the expectation of something back, or if they receive something, they want to give something back. And just very interesting how the people who are most successful are givers, but yet the people who are least successful are givers because they don't get the balance right. Sometimes they're too much giving and they're not getting on with their performance. CQ is the next one, cultural intelligence quotient, diversity, equality, inclusion. I mean, you began your life early on traveling the world and seeing people of every race and nation and background. What's been your tip that you'd give people about accepting people who are different from you and trying to understand them?
I think it's coming from a standpoint that we are all equal in life, and it's an accident of birth where you're born, what country you're born in. I would then say it's a matter of being respectful for people's values and traditions. So, Sue and I have been very fortunate to live around the world, and in the services in particular, we're lucky that I remember before we went out to Pakistan, spending a week at Farnham Castle, when you were taught about the values, the customs, how to behave. If you're not taught, listen and don't charge into a situation and assume just because you're fortunate you can take control. So I would go back to always be respectful of people, wherever they are. And you might be a road sweeper. If you're a great road sweeper, actually you're as good as anybody in the country. And if you come from, not to be self-righteous, but if you come from that standpoint, respect then results in, I think, a whole better society. And if you can actually inject some love under the right meaning for that, love and respect, people then behave appropriately. If you behave, I've seen occasionally toxic leaders, infrequently, but occasionally you do, and it generates fear, and you never ever get the best out of people.
Yeah, we'll talk about toxic leadership in a moment. I think that's a very interesting topic. Throughout your career, you've been required to be resilient because whether it be having to do that grim examination of the bodies of your friends after the Chinook crash, or other situations where adversity and setback and disappointment never kind of worked out as you thought they might do. What's your best tip on resilience and coping with setbacks?
I would say is that if you end up in a challenging situation, and we make mistakes on occasions, I would say is to learn from your mistakes, make a plan to move forward. If you've got a real friend, or probably lots of friends, to discuss it, and then move forward, and then don't look backwards, look forwards. Because actually, we mentioned it earlier in this chat, that if you continue to look backwards and you regret things, you'll suddenly find that those 4,000 weeks are gone, and your life has ended. So try, if you possibly can do so, and it's a mindset, I think, to put things behind you and move forward and learn from it.
Yeah, great wisdom there. And there's the sort of caveat that some take that literally without the added bit of what David Marquet, who was the captain of the USS Santa Fe and wrote 2 excellent books called Turn the Ship Around and Leadership as Language. And he was on this podcast. I do recommend you and others have a listen to his talk. But he was saying, there was a classic case, thinking back to your merchant Navy days, of the captain of this huge tanker who just kept going into the eye of a hurricane. And he had a couple of occasions when he could review the decision he'd made to keep going. And it's this: make a decision, but have some review points in the future where you can check, has the situation changed? Have the Russians invaded Ukraine or not? Whatever it might be. And to use those points to decide, is this still right? I think it was Churchill, wasn't it, who said he was criticizing the House of Commons for changing his opinion. He said, "Sir, I may change my opinion, but when the situation changes, what do you do?" And I think that's an addition to what I think you'd say. What's your thoughts, Seumas?
No, I would agree with that totally. And actually, you mentioned the hurricane story. I remember in the Merchant Navy, there's a typhoon coming in, and we were just off Taiwan, and we dashed for port. That's what the decision the captain made, and all the big ships were doing that, and we tied up 3 ships out, and there were 2 Russian ships came in late and had to anchor up facing out to sea. They were blown off their anchors and smashed down the side of our ships and killed hundreds of fishermen at the end of the harbor who'd gone there for safety. And then you get about half an hour of peace before it comes out again. But the captain was an inspiring leader, and by his leadership, people kept calm. We helped where we could with the fishermen and their families. And we were there for about 8 weeks as the ship was repaired. But I would agree totally with that when you made the Churchill comment there, that it's question for mission analysis, isn't it? If the situation has changed, you have to review your plan. You don't plow on regardless. I think these days in business, the situation changes so quickly. I was at a meeting with a company last night, Interos, and they were looking at, they've got a wonderful new piece of software can look at actually supply chains and track them all the way back to where they originate, because so many people will know the first and second and third lines in their supply chain, but thousands of companies had supply chains going back into Russia. What does that mean this morning? So, has the situation changed? Do people know on their risk matrix that actually there's a new risk in business this morning that they were unaware of? Apart from the stock market impacts around the world, price of oil, the price of gas, it affects all businesses. So you've got to be alive to the changes all the time. And I think have a tool that helps you to deal with it. I often, when we're doing some leadership development here, ask, how do you make a decision? And people so often look at you blankly and you think, well, how do you make a decision? You just make it like that? Or, we were all trained how to make a decision, wasn't it? Aim, practice, courses open, and plan. And that kind of logic works, I think, really well, because if you have to review a decision, yes, actually, the situation has changed from that point, and therefore I need to change my plan.
I think it's brilliant, and you really raised a number of interesting questions. People now looking at the situation with Russia invading Ukraine, and they go, "What's going to happen to Taiwan now? Are the Chinese going to take that as carte blanche? The Russians have done the Ukraine. What about them?" I think there's a lot of questions which flow out from that. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think the world has probably been. I think we're probably back where we were almost in 1938. Not to overstate the situation, and I think we need strong leadership at the moment. And President Putin is a bully, and there's only one way to deal with a bully, which is to be strong. And if you show any sign of weakness, that weakness is going to be exploited. And President Xi and President Putin have both been in power for quite some time. Russia, I was reading about President Putin's views. We know where his background came from. And 1989, when the wall came down, for him was an absolute disaster. This dissolution of the USSR. And we were talking about earlier on that the strong forces that we had on the ground to counter that. We've taken so many cuts at our armed forces since then that if we were asked to deploy a division, let alone a corps, very quickly, I suspect we'd be challenged. And it costs money to be able to have that capability ready to go. Both for all of NATO, and we've seen the discussions going on. Not all NATO members are paying their 2% that they're meant to be paying. And I can understand, it was President Trump saying, trying to encourage us all to do so. But leaders stating they're not going to put troops on the ground creates a real opportunity, because if you see, well, actually, yes, there may be financial implications, but actually I can deal with those.
No, I think we've got very troubling times ahead, and I think 1938 is exactly the scenario we're in all over again. Thank you for that. Turning to yourself and brand quotient, brand reputation, image, and impact. Over the years, how have you learnt about your own brand and reputation? Because you were in the army system, which is just starting to change now, but in business, I often do 360-degree feedback on a CEO. But I can't remember during my 20 years service in the military when we did a 360 feedback and I could give feedback on my commanding officer, or indeed 2 levels up on my brigade commander. They weren't interested in my opinion of them. They were interested in their superior's opinion of them, but not their juniors. What have you done lately to gain 360 feedback on your own performance and to continually improve, both in your current job and in previous jobs?
I know it's interesting now. The military do climate assessments, don't they? Which they ask for, and it's frequently done in business as well. I think that there's a challenge there, and I'll come back to myself after that. That you don't have to be popular to be a good leader.
No.
and in tough times, it requires tough leaders. So it's a real balance, particularly for the armed forces, because the armed forces are so different to everywhere else. That you could be asked to make that ultimate sacrifice and lay down your life. So if we try and compare ourselves in the armed services too much with business, it can undermine our operational capability, and that's what our current generation have got to deal with, because there's so much noise. Society is so much more open. Everything is on our phones. Everything we say can be heard, and therefore we have to assume that. Until you sort of gave me a heads up of the question, I never thought about my brand. I still don't think about my brand. I mean, your brand is what people think about you. I think if you try and create a brand, to be honest, I don't really like the idea of someone doing that.
No,
I think it's being yourself. I have a fantastic team here in the D group. There's one other about my age, but he's about 10 years younger. The rest are right at the beginning of their careers. And we do have open discussions. I ask them, what do you think about what we're doing? And I ask for feedback openly in a 360-degree reporting system, which I fully support. Because if you don't do that and you don't move with the times, you find yourself outdated. Yeah. And I think we have to be so careful as we get a bit older that we don't become grumpy and think life was perfect when we were young people going through the system. We reflect our times, and we have to move with those times, but actually never let our values and our standards drop. So try and apply those, but not as a boring old fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
Somebody who cares for the right reasons to try and create it's a bit cheesy, but to try and create a better life for everybody. If we can create great wealth in this country, everybody's going to be well off, and then we can help other countries around the world. Yeah. And I think that's perhaps the same in our personal lives as well.
Yeah, I think you make some very good points. And what I found in the best 360 systems in organizations and engagement surveys, things like that, is it goes wrong if they think it's a popularity contest. It's not. It's about being respected and living the values of the organization, the espoused values of the organization. And I look back on my time in the military, and I know there were senior officers who were bullies or white-collar psychopaths, if I were to call them that, but nobody caught them out because they cleverly kept looking upwards. And if they had actually done a survey of what people thought of them, they would find them utterly poisonous and toxic. But nobody called that out because the system didn't allow for it. So I agree with you, Seumas. And I would add that if it's done based on a respect and a following of the values and the culture, living, serve to lead, then that's a good system. But not if it's just a popularity contest and people are so worried about doing something in case they're not popular. That isn't what I see in 360 in business at all.
Yeah. No, I mean we run it's a potential chief executives course, C-suite directors, and it's run over a year. But the golden thread is serve to lead, and we take them to the final exercise to Sandhurst. Not as a military exercise, it's a board business exercise, but we show them around the Memorial Chapel. We have a talk on leadership and the army values, just to compare it with business, because they're all businessmen. And we have a wonderful black tie dinner in the Indian Army room, and somebody talks about the history of service. And then we do PC early the next morning, and then do a board command post exercise when they may be the chairman, the chief executive, the chief finance officer, the chief operating officer, and we put them under pressure over the day to test all the skills they've learned over the year. But there's a real emphasis on respect, and you can't respect others unless you kind of respect yourself in a way and hold yourself to account, which we have to do. And look at yourself in the mirror when you have let yourself down, and don't look back, but learn from it and then move forward.
Yeah, that sounds a brilliant course. People will be very fortunate to get on that one. I'm thinking of one CEO who just checking out people's character, because of course, I think it was Richard Dannett said it's character and its integrity. And he used the example of certain politicians who have character but no integrity whatsoever. So character attracts people to you, but integrity is how far they'll go with you. And I thought that was a very pertinent point. But this CEO, with a new hire, he'd take them out to a lovely breakfast or a lunch, and he'd arranged with the waiter that the waiter would deliberately mess up the order for this guest, get it badly wrong, and just watch the reaction of this person, how they would treat the waiter and how would they cope with the fact that things didn't work out as they thought. I thought it was brilliant. The last one, Rao, before we go on to executive teams and favorite book and then your top tip, is legacy. And we find it's very interesting. Think about stewardship. You as divisional commander of 4th Division, how do you leave things better than you found them? The idea of stewardship. How do you leave things better than you inherited it in the D group? What do you think about this whole idea of stewardship and also your legacy, both in your work and your family with grandchildren and your 3 daughters with their marriages?
I think that bit about stewardship is so important that actually, as you talked about your 4,000 weeks, you're in command for 2 or 3 years. I've been very fortunate, and I love this job in the D group, and I hope we try very hard to do our best for our members. But it is only a stewardship. You're there, hopefully. It's not about you or the individual. It was never my division or my brigade or my D group or other things I do as well. If you can leave something better than when you started, and it's not about you, that is the important thing. It's not about self. It's about having a strategy for the organization to be as prepared as you possibly can be, and then to deliver what that strategy is with your people. And without your people, you cannot deliver it. So, recognize what they've done, make sure you've got the right team there, and give them the credit for what they've done. It should never be me. It's all about others and helping. I think about what legacy you want a personal legacy. How would you wish to be remembered? And I think to be a good husband, a good father, and a good grandfather is how one would like to be remembered. As far as work is concerned, I think someone who cared, created a sense of purpose, enabled a team to succeed, and that people enjoyed coming into work. They had a bounce and a lightness in their step, because actually they were going to have a fun day, and fun in a positive way, not a stupid way.
Yeah.
Because there is, I don't know, if you achieve something, you achieve your mission, whatever that mission might be. For the whole team, it's just so important. It gives you a purpose to your life.
No, I think it's beautifully put. And we're a long time dead, so why not enjoy the work we do and have a sense of purpose and meaning, that why. Penultimate question, Seumas. Executive teams. You not only do you train executive teams and C-suites, but throughout your career, you've been someone who's been developing teams. On the occasions when you've inherited a toxic team, or one of your sub-teams is toxic, maybe an individual or the culture's gone bad in it, what's your tip on how you found it worked to turn that around into a high-performing team from one that was toxic?
I think I've been very lucky. I don't think I've ever inherited or been part of a toxic team directly, but I've observed toxic leadership, and I would agree with you. In the past, it wasn't addressed as it might have been. People didn't question leaders, and I think these days leaders, the majority of leaders, encourage questioning. They welcome people being challenged, and if you don't do that, you don't get the very best out of your teams. I think my top tip for creating a high performance team would be that when you come into a team, it's so important to get to know everybody. And you go back to John Adair, who wrote in the early 70s, didn't he? Team, task, and individual. And that's what we were all taught at Sandhurst. So get to know your top team, get to know their strengths and their weaknesses. And once you know your team, and you don't have long to do it because you need to, you can't break, you need to move on from what your predecessor was doing. But I think you need to have a very clear strategy. I think you need to have diversity in the team. And we're more aware of that now, and it's important. Probably the most important is cognitive diversity, but if you can get in there gender diversity, ethnic diversity, encourage free thought, you're going to get the best out of your team. I think I've alluded already, I think you should welcome challenge. If you can inject that passion to succeed, ensure there's very clear lines of responsibilities, and use mission commands, state what has to be achieved. Yes, they're left and right of arc of what their constraints are. Give them the necessary resources and let them get on with it and don't interfere. And if they feel they can come to you if they need help, you need to check clearly. I think you're going to succeed. And I say in business, and I think it would probably translate into the military as well, but you need to have a very clear strategy about what you're going to do, ideally on a page. I think then you need to have a risk register and you need to manage it. And you need to make sure that your cash is positive. If you've managed those, you're probably going to succeed.
Sound advice, very sound advice.
I mean, in the military, the cash bit is operational capability. So does your team generate the operational capability, your command that it should?
Yeah, no, great wisdom. Thank you. The next question was really on a book that you've read recently that you found has some great wisdom and you recommend it to others. Which book would you choose and why do you think people should read it?
I'm going to choose two, I think. And I think the first one is, and I reread it every now and again, is the War Diaries of Field Marshal Lord Allenbrook, who acted as the head of the services from 1939 until 1945. I think it's probably 1940, but he describes how he had to deal with Churchill, who could be a difficult man, I think was an inspiring leader, how during the war, he dealt with the disappointments. He always wanted to go back and command in the field, but I think it was quite right. He was probably the only man who could handle Churchill and get the very best out of Churchill. The relationships he created with the Americans, but he just wrote a paragraph at the end of each day for a man that was under real pressure for 4 or 5 years. And I just learned from him. He still managed to make time, at the weekend or the odd break during the week to have a dinner, to see his wife. He went on the odd shoot, and he read still. And I think those things are so important. And those men seem to have time for it. I mean, another one is Other Men's Flowers by Field Marshal Lord Wavell. Yeah, he could quote poetry. How do our people, do they think they have time today? And it's so difficult to make time because probably during this hour we've been chatting, you'll have had, I can see it on the bottom right hand end of my screen. You've got emails coming in. It's just non-stop, isn't it? And you'll be getting texts and LinkedIn messages and various other things. But you've just somehow got to keep things in perspective. And another book I read was Peter Drucker, from the Leadership, or the Leaders of the Future. And I dipped back into everything again because he wrote the book in 1996. And he managed to identify all the traits, the challenges that we're dealing with now, the importance of having diverse teams, the importance of having women leading companies as part of boards, but having people from different nations doing it. And that's what the RCDS did. You'd be discussing an issue and you think, I think I know the answer to this, but by the time you'd spoken to somebody from Saudi Arabia, somebody from Ghana, somebody from China, somebody from Russia, somebody from Israel, you thought, I don't know all the answers. You know, I need to understand that. I need to consult and see it from their perspective.
Really, really thoughtful. Seumas, thank you. Would you kindly now, for the 2-minute top tip, which stands in its own right, introduce yourself again, tell us about the D Group, and give us your 2-minute top tip.
Right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak for nearly an hour. But so I'm Seumas Kerr. I'm managing director of the D Group. We're a strategic business development company, and we're here to help companies realize their ambitions and succeed. We also work closely with government to bring government and business together. I wouldn't overstate our role, but we try in a small way to do that, to translate some very complex policies into the how, but that Reality's businessmen can do. So it's not me, it's what the businesses bring to that and produce papers and produce feedback. And I learn so much every day from our speakers and our members. And the key themes we deal with are national security, space, infrastructure, technology, and that all important subject at the moment of net zero and sustainability. You asked me for a top tip around sort of life in a way, I suppose. And you've taken me through a journey that I haven't gone back into for a long time, but going right from your childhood as a boy to going away to boarding school at 6, all the way through to now. And I would say, find something you have a passion for and follow it. And if you're fortunate to do that, and I think part of it is a mindset, that actually you probably never need to go to work. I don't think I've gone to work in my life. And I hope that doesn't sound trite, but I enjoy getting into work early in the morning because it means I can have some time to think and clear my inbox. I spend my day seeing people all day and have this wonderful conversation we've had for an hour, and then normally have 1 or 2 evening events with members, either doing introductions or fireside chats, or helping them with their strategy. And really, I'm just so fortunate. But I never take it for granted. And I am so lucky to have a fantastic wife, Sue, behind me and family that enables me to do that. And without Sue's support, I just couldn't do it.
Well, Seumas, thank you very much indeed for sharing that top tip and also for sharing your wisdom and experience. Please stay on the line, but thank you for being on the Inspiring Leadership series.